Greetings, I'm Detective Sergeant First Class Harry Gavel, Camden County Prosecutor's Office, Homicide Division. Retired. The story I'm about to tell you is true. The following episode recounts the details of a real homicide investigation. All information presented is taken from public court records, law enforcement files, and direct investigative experience. The names of the victims and individuals involved are used with the utmost respect. No part of this story is intended to exploit or sensationalize their suffering. Some content may be disturbing to listeners. Discretion is strongly advised. I call this story The Forgotten Angel of 24th Street. It was 1993, Camden, New Jersey. The city will not be forgotten for its violence in the streets, its crime-riddled neighborhoods, its blood trail of murder and mayhem. The city was bleeding violence. Gunfire echoed through its streets almost every night. Drug corners, boarded up homes, desperate people living behind bars over their doors and windows. The sounds of police sirens off in the distance was definitely a daily occurrence. Because the dead man here was not a murderer. This case was different. It was different for not only that reason, but this dead man wasn't a drug dealer. He wasn't a robber. He wasn't a gangster or a gang member. He was a man on a mission from God. He was the Reverend Russell Harrison Jr, age 57, an ordained minister who had spent a lifetime helping people who everyone else had forgotten. This is the true story of the Forgotten Angel. Alongside his father before him, also an ordained minister, they worked together at the Camden Rescue Mission in the 1600 block of South Broadway. He was mentored there by his father. He eventually became the executive director there. The mission was founded in 1927. In 1953, the Reverend Russell Harrison Sr. took over the mission. In 1961, the Reverend Harrison Jr. was ordained after graduating from the Philadelphia College of Bible. Together, they wrote a weekly column in the Courier Post newspaper titled This Week's Sermon. The Reverend fed the poor, arranged housing for the needy, the weary, the homeless and broken men and women wandering the streets of Camden, looking for warmth, food, or mercy. His last posting in May of 1993 read, in quotes, "Well done, unquote, thy good and faithful servant." When the mission closed in 1980, the Reverend Harrison Jr. moved the mission to his home on 24th Street. His father moved in with him, where he continued to minister until losing his battle with cancer before the murder of his beloved son. The Reverend Russell Jr. never married and lived alone in the big house on the hill. Then one Wednesday evening around 5 p.m., a neighbor heard something, a loud gunshot, later to be determined to be a single 12-gauge shotgun blast that shattered the silence on North 24th Street the Kramer Hill section of East Camden. The neighbor did not report the gunshot heard. It was not uncommon for gunshots to be heard in the hood and not reported. The following day, Thursday, Reverend Harrison Jr.'s body would be found outside the side kitchen door of his modest home. A passerby reported seeing a man slumped and lying crumpled, supine on the ground at the base of a side door at the 3-story standalone brick and wood home at the end of the block on 24th Street. He had been shot once in the upper chest. The Camden police were called. They notified homicide. Camden City Homicide Detective Jerome Boyd and I met in the side yard of the Reverend where the body was found. I evaluated the scene and called for a crime lab to respond to the location. We were frustrated right from the beginning. The gunshot heard the day before had not been called in. A setback for us, for sure. The killer now had an almost 24-hour head start on us. You've heard of the first 48, I'm sure. Meaning in a homicide investigation, the case starts to go cold after the first 48 hours have passed. Well, this case then was already halfway there. I don't necessarily believe the 48-hour number. I've found that the time frame in homicide investigations when evidence starts to deteriorate varies. Immediately after a murder, evidence can be destroyed. There are many factors affected. That discussion we'll save for another time. The Reverend's house had been torn apart. We found nothing except one spent shell casing and a sabot, that's S-A-B-O-T, from a 12-gauge shotgun in the kitchen near the inside of the kitchen door. A sabot, if you are not familiar with the term, is the soft cotton or sometimes plastic wad of material which is used to contain the pellets or shot, if you will, which is expelled from the shotgun blast. There were no known witnesses to this crime. We would learn later, no fingerprints of anyone suspected were located. No footprint impressions that shouldn't already be there. No arrests. Just a cold-blooded murder of a good man in a city drowning in violence. We had a murder of an ordained minister in his own home. It was not the only murder of an ordained minister I would be lead detective on. It would be, however, one of 2 ministers cut down by a single shotgun blast up close and personal. Unlike the murder of the Reverend Gary Gottschall, who was working the graveyard shift at the Merritt gas station on Admiral Wilson Boulevard, he was stuck up at gunpoint, the point of a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun. When he had no access to the safe, he was cut in half by a single blast. He died right where he stood on the phone with the Camden police dispatcher. 4 months later, the 2 killers were caught. See my episode entitled The Graveyard Shift. Indeed. This one was different. It remains unsolved. Unsolved for over 3 decades. 33 years to be exact. Please listen in closely. Perhaps you can help. We locked the residence down. It was now a full-blown homicide investigation in progress. We stationed a uniformed Camden City police officer at the front door of the residence. We got the brief from the first officer on the scene as to his findings upon his arrival at the scene. The residence had been searched by the Camden police for any suspects who might still be in the home. That search was conducted and completed. The all-clear sign was given. Police detectives converged on the scene. The crime scene investigators photographed the scene in its entirety. A diagram of the entire property was sketched out. All 3 floors of the home were examined for latent fingerprints that should not be there. We searched for foot or shoe impressions, both inside and around the property. Then CSI investigators videotaped the points of interest, including the lifeless body in its found location and position. The body was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics via telemetry. When all of the initial procedures were completed, the coroner on the scene arranged for and had the body transported to the Camden County Medical Examiner's office, where an autopsy would be performed by Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Robert Siegel. Detective Boyd and myself would attend when the schedule was set. The body exhibited a large gaping hole with notable gunshot residue, also known as GSR, and stippling around the wound to the upper chest cavity. The stippling and the GSR were indicative to the gunshot having been discharged at close range. He, in fact, was lying on the ground, supine, or supine, however you want to pronounce it, slumped and crumpled at the base of the side kitchen door of the residence. The side yard appeared to be decently cared for, with various flowers in the garden, having concrete bird feeders and paved walkways, making for even a sadder setting for a crime scene. The neighborhood canvassing had produced nothing of evidential value, other than the shock waves the murder sent through the neighborhood, and their repetitive stories of the kindness the Reverend shared from his home ministry. When we entered the residence, first thing we noted was that the front door had no indication of having been forced. The living room and dining rooms were neat and tidy. There was no obvious indication that any type of struggle took place in or on the premises. However, glaring at us was the telltale sign that the home had been ransacked from top to bottom. It was a 3-story home. Every drawer had pulled out. Their contents dumped on the floor. Every closet space appeared to have been rummaged through by the intruder or intruders. However, we had no independent indications that anything had been stolen from the residence during the intrusion. There were no obvious missing appliances, TVs, stereo, radio, jewelry boxes. Nothing that we could determine might have been stolen. No one was available to give us any information as to what, if anything, had been stolen. The only logical explanation which lent itself to a possible motive for the killing was that they were looking for money. We had determined that the Reverend was shot in the upper chest while he was inside his kitchen, standing by the kitchen side door. It was not confirmed that he was shot upon surprising the intruder or intruders by coming home while the burglary was in progress. Was the Reverend inside the home when the killer arrived at the residence? The reason I think he was already home was because, number one, the front door and side kitchen door showed no sign of forced entry. Number two, the side kitchen did not seem to be a routine point of entry to the home by the Reverend. As to the condition of the steps below the door, I recall them being partially missing and in disrepair. In addition to that, there was no outside light present at the side door to guide him if he were to enter the home from the side in the dark of night. This was Camden, the murder capital of the nation. We just couldn't be sure, one way or the other. It was puzzling. Later, we were informed that after an exhaustive search for latent fingerprints by the crime lab investigators, there was not one single latent fingerprint found inside the entire residence, which we hoped may have been left by the killer. The prints which were found were eventually all accounted for. We deducted from that knowledge that the perpetrators wore gloves, which suggested a planned robbery. The time of the gunshot heard, 5 p.m. on a Thursday evening. The body was found. The gunshot heard was Wednesday, the evening before. No one saw anything out of the ordinary. We were slowly developing a motive. This was a single standing home, somewhat remote from the other homes on the block. The victim was a minister, probably thought of as an easy target, someone who would not fight back, one who ran a ministry out of his home. He probably was believed to have money in the home, which he collected as donations to support his ministry. He would appear to be the perfect victim of a robbery, and this was a time in the city that was full of desperate gypsies, tramps, thieves, and killers. There was no rounding up of the usual suspects in this case. Half of the city's population were suspects. This case was very frustrating, to say the least. A dead reverend, shot close range in the chest with a single blast of a 12-gauge shotgun. No fingerprints. No known stolen items. No known vehicle involved in coming or leaving the scene. before or after the fact. No suspect named or suspected. No camera footage available. Just a daylight, brazen, attempted armed robbery, cold-blooded murder of an ordained minister in his own home, his house of worship, his sanctity for the needy, trying to do good for his troubled community. We believed we knew what they were looking for. It became obvious to us. What's the root of all evil? Sex, drugs, and money. The almighty dollar. Money has many uses. It pays for things. And sometimes we pay with our lives for the hunger for it. It appeared they searched everywhere for it. Under carpets, cushions, mattresses, in cupboards and drawers. Anywhere you might think that cash could be kept. The fact that the Reverend was killed does not mean that they didn't find what they wanted. It just means they left a dead man. Dead men tell no tales. That fact told us that these killers were deadly, dangerous, and experienced criminals who wanted no parts of prison. My partner and myself spent the rest of the day and several days thereafter going back to the property. We asked ourselves, what did we miss? What are we missing? Who can we talk to who might know something? Information was coming in. It was being filtered in slowly, but no answers were forthcoming. We learned that the current director of the original mission was the Reverend D. Alvin Stewart. With the help and guidance of Harrison's, he had taken over the old mission on 1600 block of South Broadway after it closed in 1980. He told us that when he first came to town 5 years earlier, Reverend Harrison Jr. and his father had reached out to help him. They opened their hearts to him and made the peace mission possible. He said his death was a great loss to him. He was totally shaken up by it. It was like losing a cherished family member. Recently, their last time together, they prayed together over an hour and a half. He quoted that the last thing they said to one another was, quote, "We have to get together more often," unquote. He stated that he began calling the Reverend on Wednesday evening. After not getting an answer to his call, he called a few more times on Wednesday evening. Still, no response. He called again on Thursday. The phone just rang and rang and rang. No answer to his call. We pressed hard searching for a living relative of Reverend Harrison. To no avail. The very last thing that anyone would have ever been thinking was that the Reverend had been murdered, lying shot to death in the side yard of his own home. Friends of the slain minister were also assisting in searching for his relatives so as to ensure that he would receive a proper and respectable funeral service. The Reverend D. Alvin Stewart had promised to ask the police officials to release the the body to his mission in the event that no relatives were located. He would see to it that his body would receive interment at the Harley Cemetery on Haddon Avenue in Camden, New Jersey. That is exactly what had occurred after no family was located. In the meantime, we were still going around in circles, asking ourselves, what is not here that should be here? What is here that should not be here? A lot of the time, we get those answers, but not this time. Not on this murder. We had hit a brick wall. The investigation was stalled. Now, we were confident that we did what needed to be done in the case. We hit this case hard. We got the word out. We spoke to church associates, known friends of the Reverend. We released wanted information flyers. We spoke to the media asking for public help. Nothing. A dead end. Homicide detectives are supposed to solve murders. That was our job. And most of the time, we did. We caught robbers, predators, career criminals, fugitives, gangsters, husbands, wives, cold-blooded killers, and even child murderers. But this case, this one stayed behind. The Reverend Harrison Jr. wasn't living a violent life. He wasn't out hurting people. By every account, he spent his days trying to help the poor, feed the hungry, and comfort to people society had abandoned. And somehow, those are among the cases that can haunt detectives the most. The good victims, the innocent ones, the people who deserve better. We worked the case. We chased the very few leads that we had. We hoped for fingerprints, witness testimony, confessions, an anonymous tip, anything. Sometimes in the silence of a dead investigation, you even find yourself hoping for something more. A break to come out of nowhere. A miracle maybe. Maybe even a little divine intervention. We would welcome a piece of luck. Sometimes even a blind squirrel trips over an acorn. But not this time. Not in the murder of Camden's forgotten angel. The case is now colder than a well digger's ass digging a trench in Siberia. This tragic murder is over 30 years old. 3 decades have passed. Well, 33 years to be exact. I'm requesting 2 simple things. Number 1, take a moment to remember the long forgotten. Number 2, if you have any information on this cold case, please notify the Camden County Prosecutor's Office Homicide Division at 856-225-8400. Let me repeat that. 856-225-8400. Ask for the cold case unit. Tell them Detective Gavel, my pen name, did a podcast episode on this case from the murder capital of the nation entitled The Forgotten Angel on 24th Street. Tell them I was the original lead on the case, or hit me up on my Facebook page. I'll kick it with you. At the time of this murder, I did have a few suspects in mind who were very capable of this sort of crime. I couldn't find a connection. I would love to see justice prevail for this angel of goodwill, the late Reverend Russell Harrison Jr. Rest in peace. We are still trying, and you, sir, are not forgotten. Sometimes, as time passes, information has a way of coming forward. Hopefully, someone out there hearing the sound of my voice perhaps can shine a light on this very cold case. Revenge is a dessert best served cold. The end. This is Detective Sergeant First Class Harry Gavel. See you next time for another true murder case from the murder capital of the nation.